Alright, we're going to look at the diencephalon next. And there's not nearly as much information to cover, but this is the central core of the forebrain. It consists of three structures: the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. So when it comes to the thalamus, it is the relay station for information. It's going to receive afferent or sensory impulses that arrive at the central nervous system from all of our different senses, and they converge and they synapse and they come to the thalamus. It kind of acts like the train station for our brain, receiving information and deciding where to send it before it can be converted or integrated into a motor output. And these impulses that are arriving at the thalamus are going to be kind of grouped into those that are of a similar function, and then that will allow for sorting, editing, and then relayed as a group to the proper association cortex. Now, all the inputs that are ascending to the cerebral cortex pass through the thalamus, so it plays a key role in mediating sensation, motor activities, cortical arousal, learning, memory, because it's basically controlling what gets to the cerebral cortex and when and where it goes. Then we have the hypothalamus, which is located below the thalamus, and it forms kind of the bottom and side walls of the third ventricle and kind of caps the brainstem. It is also connected to a pituitary gland via a stalk of tissue called the infundibulum. Now, when we're talking about the hypothalamus, we're talking about a structure that mainly carries out the processes of homeostasis. So, hypothalamus, homeostasis are kind of two words you should equate together. Now, the way it does this is by having many different functions. It's the main visceral control system of the body. It controls essentially many of the body organs. It's the autonomic control center, so it regulates blood pressure rate and force of the heartbeat, and digestive tract motility, rate and depth of breathing, and many other body organ activities. It also is responsible for emotion. It's involved in the perception of pleasure, fear, rage. It's the body temperature system. It's the body temperature regulation space. It is going to be our food and thirst center. And it's also going to regulate water balance. It also works with the pineal gland to regulate sleep and wake cycles, and is connected to the reticular activating system. And it's going to be able to control endocrine system functioning. And along with the nervous system, the endocrine system is the other controlling and communicating system in the body. So the hypothalamus deals with body homeostasis, but it almost does it all. Then we have the epithalamus, which includes other tissue besides the pineal gland, but that's the main part we're going to look at, and it secretes melatonin. Melatonin is going to be a hormone that regulates the sleep-wake cycle, and it works with parts of the reticular activating system and the hypothalamus. Alright, next we're going to look at the brainstem. The brainstem is located adjacent to what we're calling the diencephalon, and it's going to be located near the cerebellum. It controls automatic behaviors that are necessary for survival and also has three regions: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, sometimes just called the medulla. Now, the midbrain consists of structures like the cerebral peduncles, the corpora quadrumina, areas that are going to be for alertness. Then you have the pons, which is mainly conduction pathways between the brain and the spinal cord. So the big star is the medulla oblongata, which is the location of several visceral motor nuclei controlling vital functions such as cardiac and respiratory rate, and also involved in functions like vomiting, hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, and sneezing. But areas like the cardioexcitatory and cardioinhibitory centers for cardiac functioning are located in the medulla, and respiratory centers like the pontine and also the anterior and dorsal respiratory areas are located in this general space. Alright, here we can see a view of the brainstem. So you can see under the purple diencephalon, you have the midbrain, the pons, and then the medulla oblongata. And it's the medulla oblongata that is going to be continuous with the spinal cord. And then our last adult brain region that we're going to look at is the cerebellum. So it's located dorsal to the pons and the medulla. It protrudes under the occipital lobe of the cerebrum, sometimes called the little brain, and it makes up 11% of the brain's mass. It provides for a lot of subconscious activity processing, and it provides precise timing and appropriate patterns of skeletal muscle contraction. When we look at the cerebellum and we cut it in half and see a cross-section, we can note that just like the brain, it has outer gray matter and inner white matter. Because of the shape of the cerebellum, the inner white matter takes on a tree-like shape and therefore is called the arbor vitae, or that means tree of life. There's actually 2 lobes to the cerebellum, a left and right, or 2 lateral lobes, and they're connected by transverse fibers of a structure called the vermis. And the cerebellum actually receives impulses of the intent to initiate skeletal muscle contraction. And that's going to be voluntary muscle contraction. It uses information from the body, from proprioceptors that let us know where we are in space to inform the cerebellum and how it puts together information. The cerebellar cortex, the outer gray matter, actually calculates the best way to perform a movement. So that blueprint of coordinated movement that the premotor cortex generally sends out to the body is usually fine-tuned by the cerebellum. There's also a little bit of cerebellar cognitive processing. It plays a role in language and problem solving and helps us recognize and predict sequences of events, which is why it's also good at putting together that blueprint. There are also 2 functional brain systems. These are just networks of neurons working together, and they span really wide areas of the brain. So they're true neural networks. The 2 are the limbic system and the reticular formation. Now, the limbic system consists of areas of the cerebrum and the diencephalon, and is involved in emotions and very extensively connected throughout the brain. So it's going to be able to respond to a wide variety of environmental stimuli, especially those related to emotion, so anger, danger, fear responses, these intense emotions. It also plays a role in expressing emotions via gestures and resolving mental conflict. It also is going to be able to put emotional responses to odors, so like feeling like a skunk smells bad. The limbic system is definitely considered our emotional brain, but it does consist of structures located on the medial aspects of the cerebral hemispheres and diencephalon, and includes the rhinencephalon or smell brain. So structures like the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the anterior nucleus of the thalamus are a part of the limbic system. Really important parts involved in emotion are the amygdala, which deals with anger, danger, and fear responses, and the cingulate gyrus, which plays a role in expressing emotions via gestures and helps resolve mental conflict. So the limbic system is able to interact with multiple parts of the brain. It can interact with the multimodal association areas, like the prefrontal lobes, so it can react emotionally to conscious understandings, or give you a kind of consciously aware feeling of an emotion that's in your life. And again, it very much connects to many areas of the brain, including those that are important for long-term memories, like the hippocampal structures that convert new information into long-term memory. Now, our second system that we're going to be looking at is the reticular formation that really just keeps the cerebrum alert. It's also going to work with kind of a secondary system called the reticular activating system, or RAS, and what it does is dampen familiar repetitive or weak sensory inputs. So say a person's wearing too much perfume, and they're always wearing too much perfume, but you get used to it because as you sit in a room, you're able to pay less attention to it. But this also explains why you're able to study in a crowded cafeteria if needed. Over time, this system, this reticular formation, will dampen unneeded or meaningless sensory stimuli. It actually dampens about 99% of all sensory stimuli. Think about it. You're not constantly thinking about every single space where your shirt touches you. You're not feeling your teeth touch your lips. That's because the reticular formation or reticular activating system is dampening many of those stimuli because they're unimportant. An example of a homeostatic imbalance that involves this system is taking the drug LSD. It actually interferes with this sensory dampening, and that promotes an overwhelming sensory overload, which is associated with taking the drug LSD. Other things that can, instead of inhibiting, kind of modulate or also do something similar on a less extreme scale are things like sleep, alcohol, sleep-inducing drugs, and tranquilizers. Those can also modulate the activity of the reticular activating system. All right, next we're going to be looking at brain waves and looking at kind of normal brain function and kind of the differences between when you're awake, asleep, or focusing. So make sure to watch that video.